My name is Lena Hart. I'm 28, a UX designer in Seattle, and last month my mother leaned back at our family dinner, smirked, and said, "You're lucky we even include you." The words landed sharper than the knife beside my plate. For years, I'd swallowed lines like that, let them bruise quietly, but this time the room went still. Forks frozen Clara's. My sister lips curving into that pity smile she saves just for me. Dad staring at his glass like it could save him. I felt my chest tighten, that old instinct to laugh it off. Instead, I set my fork down. The clink echoed like a crack in the ceiling. I breathed deep, and for the first time in years, I didn't shrink. What came out of my mouth didn't sound loud, but it was enough to split our family open. Before I go on, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you've ever felt pushed aside by your own family, hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you don't want to miss how this story unfolds. I grew up in a house that smelled like lemon cleaner and rules. Our Green Lake kitchen had a black and white tile floor my mother polished until the grout lines looked drawn with a ruler. She ran life like a calendar taped inside her head. Monday, roast chicken; Tuesday, laundry; Wednesday, Clara's dance. I was the space between appointments, useful mostly for holding place. At dinner, Mom plated everything in symmetrical halves, a performance of fairness that somehow always leaned toward my sister. Clara got the thigh with extra crispy skin. I got the breast that went dry if you looked at it too long. When I was little, I told myself I liked the dry part. It felt like being good. Mom said she hated sloppiness, but what she really hated was unpredictability. She arranged people like centerpiece flowers, the tallest in the middle, the rest bending around it. Clara was tall, at least in the ways that counted to Mom. Pretty and easy with adults good at taking up light. I learned to step 1 inch to the left so my shadow wouldn't cross hers in photos. Dad would say smile, and I would thin and steady a line of weather that didn't change much. I remember the first time I realized the house spoke a language I only half understood. It was Thanksgiving. I was 8, Clara 10. Both of us wearing matching velvet dresses that itched at the collar. The grown-ups passed dishes that steamed up the chandelier crystals. Mom carved the turkey like a surgeon. When the wishbone came out slick and shining, Clara got it without asking. Mom said it made sense because she was older. Next year, she said to me, and it landed in my stomach as something heavier than bone. After dinner, I stood in the hallway where the heat vents clicked and held the spare wishbone Dad had fished from the other half. He said a good engineer always finds redundancies. I closed my eyes and wished to be seen. The bone snapped. My half was the shorter one. School was easier in the way that math is easier than people. If you did the steps, you got the answer. I liked that. I liked rulers and stacks of sharp pencils and the way graph paper boxes made every decision feel measurable. When the district held a science fair, I built a website instead of a volcano because I wanted to see what would happen when you clicked a button and something changed. I stayed up alone watching the cursor blink while the rest of the house slept. The site was ugly, and the font turned to nonsense on Mom's old tablet, but it worked. I won a ribbon. At the ceremony, Dad clapped proud, but careful like pride might spill if he moved too fast. Mom took a picture, then turned to fuss with Clara's hair. On the way home, we stopped for ice cream, and the clerk asked who the celebration was for. Clara said both of us. She had won a costume award for a dance recital the week before. Mom nodded. One family, she said, one celebration. I learned that victories were shared, but losses had names. Clara and I were never enemies. That would have been simpler. She was sweet, even when she benefited from the way rooms leaned. She sat on my bed and painted her nails and told me I should soften my eyebrows. She borrowed my books and never cracked the spine. When she got a first phone, she let me hold it like it was a baby bird. She said I was too serious, and maybe she was right. Being serious felt like the only way to keep my shape. At church, potlucks, the basement smelled like coffee and bleach and the stale sweetness of sheet cake. The grown-ups asked about school in the way you ask the weather how it's doing. I learned to deliver short reports. Fine, good, busy. Clara said things like, "Oh my God, you have to try the green bean casserole, Mrs. Mendez, it is unreal," and people laughed like the air had been refreshed. Mom watched her like a proud director, as if Clara had hit every mark on stage. She watched me to make sure I kept my voice low and my skirt straight. Teenage years were a long hallway of obligations. I did well in the classes where your answers could be counted. English felt like walking across a floor where the boards shifted underfoot. Teachers wrote in the margins of my papers words like insightful and controlled, and then gave me the same grade as the boy who forgot commas and wrote however he felt. I kept writing anyway. I coded late at night on an old laptop that wheezed like a person sleeping. When I hit a wall, I took it apart and put it back together. I liked systems that admitted their logic if you were patient enough. The summer before senior year, the money talk happened. Not a talk exactly, more like a monologue with post-it notes. Mom spread forms across the dining table, FAFSA, and financial aid packets and scholarship websites. She said the Hart family had priorities. She said traveling abroad would give Clara the polish she needed for the future. She said college funds were a flexible thing. She said, Lena, you're the practical one. You'll get scholarships. You always get the grades that come with money. You'll land on your feet. I watched her ledger the numbers into columns. Dad stood by the window watching the street as if traffic could make a decision for him. The word temporary was used, then used again like a bandage that keeps sliding off. Clara returned from a dance rehearsal glowing and kissed Mom's cheek and said Rome in the fall would be magic. I looked down at my hands and imagined putting them on a steering wheel, driving for as long as gas would allow. When the letter came a month later confirming Clara's spot on the abroad program with a cheerful payment schedule, I congratulated her and then went to my room and opened my laptop and told myself that hard work was the real currency. It was a comforting story because it only needed me. I got into the state university with a partial scholarship and 3 part-time jobs. I stocked shelves at dawn-logged attendance for a professor who wore the same tweed jacket every Tuesday, freelanced little websites for local businesses that wanted their hours listed correctly. I ate cereal for dinner and learned which buildings had couches you could sleep on without getting yelled at by security. I called home on Sundays. Mom gave updates formatted like minutes from a board meeting. Clara was thriving abroad. Dad's back was acting up. Aunt June had said something unhelpful at a family gathering. Was I staying out of trouble? Was I keeping up? Did I need anything? I said no, because the kind of need I had wasn't the kind you could box and ship. Grandma Martha mailed letters that smelled like her hand cream. She wrote in a looping script that leaned forward as if eager to arrive. She sent $20 bills tucked inside cards and recipes with notes in the margins. She told me not to become so capable that people forgot I needed care. It felt like an instruction and a warning. By graduation, I had a portfolio that looked grown. Companies liked mock-ups that moved when you clicked them. I got a junior role at Northbeam, a startup with a brick and ivy building in a part of Seattle where the sidewalks were always damp. The office was open plan, which meant you were never alone and always a little lonely. The espresso machine hissed like a cat in the mornings. The first time a product manager said this is clean work in a room full of people, I swallowed so quickly my throat hurt. I took the bus home with my badge still clipped to my blazer, too wired to sit still, and imagined a future that had hinges that turned smoothly if you cared for them. Moving to Capitol Hill felt like stepping into a version of myself that was less pixelated. The apartment was small and high-ceilinged with a window that faced a brick wall, but the wall grew ivy and the light in the mornings was kind. I furnished it slowly, one chair, then a thrifted rug, then a plant I kept alive longer than I expected. On Sundays, I walked around the neighborhood to learn the smells by corner. The Rain and Bean Cafe had a burnt sugar aroma that clung to your coat. The vintage shop always smelled like old perfume and dust. I liked being able to narrate my own life by scent and sound. The first time Mom visited the new apartment, she ran a fingertip along a windowsill and frowned like the dust said something about me. She brought a box of stemless wine glasses and a lecture about adulthood. We went out for lunch and she mentioned the club membership the way people mention the weather turning. She said Rain City offered a young professional rate, and wouldn't it be nice to have the whole family on one account for holidays? She said she could handle the paperwork if I just used my name for the application. She said it would help with her event contacts since she managed bookings there and the manager liked clean files. She said we would all benefit. She said it would be temporary until Clara's credit, until Dad's back, until the economy. She said the club was practically a necessity in networking. I imagined those chandeliers, that chandelier silence from childhood, and nodded because saying no felt like breaking a law I didn't know how to write. So, my name went on the forms. The dues would pass through Mom. She said a handoff I didn't need to worry about. The emails started arriving in my inbox. Welcome, Ms. Hart Primary Member. Please confirm your preferences. I forwarded them to her without thinking like moving mail to the right box in a lobby. It was just administration. That's what I told myself. In those first 2 years at Northbeam, I learned the art of making something simple enough to feel inevitable. We were designing a new onboarding flow for a financial app, and every button needed to be a promise that didn't overpromise. I liked the days when we built and tested and rebuilt. I disliked the days when we presented and people used words like vibe and instinct. Sometimes I practiced saying no in my head the way you practice a foreign language under your breath. At performance reviews, I watched managers struggle to find a criticism they could name. They left with their compliments. I left with a quiet dissatisfaction I couldn't code around. Home visits were a different kind of test. Mom's house hadn't changed except for new towels and a collection of beige throw pillows that made the couch look upholstered in dinner rolls. Clara drifted in with the kind of chaos that passes for charm. She was freelancing in PR, which seemed to involve a lot of photos and making plans to plan. She lived with a friend who also had the gift of turning small talk into attention. They were good at life as showroom. I told myself it was a talent worth having. I told myself it wasn't the only one. On one of those Sundays, Mom made pasta and talked through her upcoming events at the club. She used first names like they were trophies. Mr. Reeves this and the mayor's assistant that, and how people respected a family that presented itself well. Then she leaned into a different tone. She asked about my finances in a way that sounded like concern and felt like bookkeeping. She said property taxes had done something ridiculous this quarter and she would float it and pay me back in a week. She said she had already set up a temporary autopay using my card because she was in the portal and it was easier than asking for passwords. She smiled at Dad as if he could back up the logic. He nodded as if logic were a stray cat he didn't want to startle. I stared at my plate and said all right. The noodles were overcooked. I ate anyway. On the bus back to Capitol Hill, I opened my banking app and watched a new line recurring in neat monthly increments. Temporary is a generous word. It means indefinite as long as you don't look closely. I closed the app. The city lights blurred on the window. That blur was the nearest thing to ease I knew. I told myself I could afford it. I could, technically. Numbers are good at telling partial truths. I told myself families carry each other. I told myself that discipline is a kind of love. When Grandma called that week and said I sounded tired, I said the season was busy and didn't specify which season. She told me to rest my eyes 10 minutes every hour and to show my teeth when I smiled so pictures wouldn't make people worry. At Rain City with Mom for one of her events, I stood in line at the front desk while she adjusted her scarf in a mirror, making sure the silk fell like a planned coincidence. The receptionist smiled at me in that quick-trained way and asked to confirm the reservation. I gave my last name. She looked at her screen and said, of course, Ms. Lena Hart, primary member. My name landed in the room like a glass placed too hard on a table. Mom corrected her without looking over. She said, oh no, you mean the family account. And the receptionist's smile recalibrated to neutral. It meant nothing to the people around us. It meant everything to me. I did not say anything. I watched the chandelier crystals buzz almost imperceptibly from the HVAC and thought about how easy it is to mistake shaking for light. College ended with a gown that smelled like starch and sweat, the kind of fabric that clung in the wrong places. Clara stood next to me in photos, her hair falling in glossy waves, her grin wide as though she owned the moment. She hadn't earned the diploma in my hand, but she acted like the crowd was hers. Mom beamed at her more than me, fussing over a speck of lint on Clara's dress. Dad clapped my back once awkward, as though the gesture was a handshake in disguise. Grandma Martha hugged me longest, whispering, "Don't let them shrink you down." Her perfume of lavender oil soaked into my collar a scent I'd later hold onto like a secret compass. After graduation, life at Northbeam sharpened me. Deadlines stacked like bricks. My portfolio thickened. The startup's office smelled like roasted coffee beans and damp coats, and I stayed late so often the janitor greeted me by name. Dylan, my teammate, became my only friend who noticed when I hadn't eaten. He'd drop a protein bar on my desk without a word. Those nights, the glow of the monitor felt like home steadier than the one in Green Lake. Still, every family gathering dragged me back. On birthdays, Clara's cakes towered with layers of fondant and sparklers. Mine came as a grocery store sheet cake with my name scrawled slightly wrong in blue icing. On one Christmas, Clara unwrapped pearl earrings from Mom while I opened a planner that looked re-gifted. The silence afterward was louder than any cheer. I learned to smile with my lips, not my eyes. Then came the summer vacation fund. Dad shuffled papers at the dining table, muttering about costs. Mom leaned on the chair, her nails tapping rhythm like a gavel. "Lena, you've got steady paychecks. You can cover the deposit. We'll reimburse you after the trip." The way she said "will" sounded like a lie wearing Sunday clothes. Clara chimed in, her voice sugar sweet. "It's just easier if you handle it, you're so organized." I paid. Again. The money left my account with the neat efficiency of a guillotine. Weeks later, when I asked casually about reimbursement, Mom waved me off. "Don't be so transactional. Family isn't about keeping score." Her smirk that day felt identical to the one she would throw at me years later, the one that split something open in me forever. Aunt June saw more than she said. At one barbecue in Fremont, she slipped beside me while the others laughed by the grill. She passed me a soda can and murmured, "Your mother has a way of erasing people until they erase themselves. Don't let her." Her words pressed into me like fingerprints on wet cement. The real crack came through a text message. I was in the Rain and Bean Cafe laptop open when Aunt June accidentally forwarded me a screenshot. A family group chat. Hardcore. My name wasn't on the list. Mom had written, "Let's keep it small. Lena doesn't add much energy anyway." Clara had replied with a laughing emoji. Dad had stayed silent. My coffee tasted suddenly bitter metallic, as if I'd bitten into the cup. Dylan saw my face pale and asked what was wrong. I told him it was nothing, but in my chest, something was breaking apart like old plaster. I didn't confront them. Not yet. I told myself timing mattered. Revenge isn't a shout, it's a whisper that grows teeth. So I tucked the screenshot into a folder on my desktop labeled Receipts. Nights back at my Capitol Hill apartment, I'd stare at the glow of the Rain City emails. "Dear Ms. Hart, primary member." That phrase became both insult and weapon. Each line item in my bank app taxes, dues, deposits was proof I wasn't lucky to be included. They were lucky I hadn't cut them out. I didn't know it then, but every small betrayal was kindling. And one day, all it would take was a spark. The fall before everything cracked open, Seattle turned cold early. Rain slicked the sidewalk's leaves, plastered to windshields like forgotten notes. I worked late at North Beam, the office buzzing with fluorescent hums, while outside the city pulsed with umbrellas and brake lights. Those nights I thought of home, not the apartment in Capitol Hill with its ivy wall, but the Green Lake house where I'd grown up half visible. Every visit back felt like stepping into a stage set. Mom rehearsed her lines, Dad took his silent cues, Clara floated in as the star. I was a background extra in a play I was funding. One October evening, Mom called. "Sweetheart, Rain City is hosting a gala. Clara needs support for her PR pitch. Bring your laptop, maybe tidy her slides. You're good with details." Her tone left no room for refusal. I went. The chandeliers dripped light like melting ice. Clara shone in sequins, introducing herself to men in cufflinks. When her pitch flashed on the big screen, I froze. The mock-ups on her slides, clean, intuitive, clickable, were mine. Screens I'd built at North Beam, stripped of my watermark, paraded as Clara's work. Applause thundered. She smiled graciously, the perfect golden child. My hands shook the stem of my glass, slick with sweat. Later, when I confronted her in the restroom's marble quiet, she laughed. "Relax, Lena. It's just family helping family. You should be flattered." Flattered. The word echoed like an insult. I walked out without replying, my chest buzzing like a live wire. Weeks later, at a Sunday dinner, Dad cleared his throat. "Property taxes are up again? Lena, could you cover another month until things smooth out?" His voice cracked, ashamed. Mom's eyes, however, held no shame. They gleamed with expectation. I nodded silent. Inside, another brick stacked onto the wall I was building between us. Grandma Martha's birthday arrived in November. She wanted nothing fancy, just dinner at Green Lake with her granddaughters. Clara waltzed in late, showered with kisses anyway. I had been there an hour early helping set the table, ignored. Halfway through the meal, Mom smirked her wine glass, catching the light. "You're lucky we even include you, Lena." The words slid into the air like a blade. Forks froze. Clara pressed her lips together in a smile she couldn't hide. Dad looked down at his plate. My chest tightened with that old instinct swallow nod, disappear. But this time something inside me rebelled. I set my fork down with a sharp clink. The sound cracked the silence. I drew in a breath, deep and steady. Years of small betrayals of erased credit of bills siphoned from my account, all of it gathered behind my ribs. I didn't speak yet. Not then. But in that pause in the cold air between her smirk and my answer, the balance shifted. I knew the girl who once wished on broken wishbones was gone. What they didn't know was that every receipt, every email, every hidden chat was already stacked in my favor. I lifted my eyes steady now and met hers. Revenge had already begun, though no one at the table could see it yet. If the flashbacks were seeds, the months after Grandma's birthday were the weeds choking through the cracks. Everything tightened. The house in Green Lake seemed smaller, airless. Every phone call from my mother was a disguised transaction. It started with Clara's pitch, the theft that still burned in my throat. At Rain City, she had smiled under chandeliers, fielding compliments that should have been mine. I pretended to let it go, but in truth, I was cataloging. My laptop folder receipts grew heavier. Each screenshot was a brick. A week later, Clara invited me for coffee near Pike Place. She ordered a lavender latte, the kind that photographs well while I stuck to plain drip. She leaned across the table phone, glowing between us. "Lena, could you polish a few slides for me? Just quick tweaks. I'm meeting a client tonight." I scrolled through the file she sent. Half of it was lifted wholesale from my North Beam mock-ups. "Clara?" I said slowly, "This is my work." She waved her hand, nails painted a glossy red. "Details, details. You know Mom always says we're a team. Don't be territorial." The word territorial sliced deep. My jaw clenched. I wanted to slam the laptop shut to walk out. Instead, I saved the file exported metadata and tucked it neatly into receipts. That night, Dylan caught me staring blankly at my screen. "You look like you've been run over," he said. I almost laughed. More like slowly drained. He slid a protein bar across my desk. "Whatever you're building, make sure it's for you, not them." The following Sunday, Mom called with her usual clipped cheer. "Sweetheart, I need a favor. Clara has an event at Rain City and we're short one volunteer. You can cover registration, right? I have work." "Oh, come on, Lena. It's just one evening. Besides, you could use the exposure networking, you know." Networking. That word again, like glitter covering rot. I said no. For the first time, flat and cold. There was a pause on the line, sharp enough to bleed. Then she sighed. "Well, don't expect to be in the photos." The photos. Her currency of belonging. My throat burned. The week after I opened my bank app and froze. Property tax payments 3 months in a row were draining automatically. I hadn't approved it. My card was still linked. Mom's temporary fix had turned into theft, disguised as convenience. When I confronted her, she laughed lightly. "Don't be dramatic. We'll settle it next quarter. Next quarter, next year, next never." One night in November, Aunt June called. Her voice crackled like static. "Did you see it?" she asked. "See what she sent me another screenshot. Heartcore, the group chat. My name missing again. This time Clara had posted a photo of her Rain City event. Caption, "Family makes everything shine brighter." Mom replied with hearts. Dad a thumbs up. I stared at it until the screen blurred. Family, the word itself, a knife. The next day at North Beam, while everyone fussed over holiday schedules, I opened my laptop to stare at the folder receipts. The weight of it filled the room more than the hum of printers or the hiss of the espresso machine. I whispered to myself, not yet, but soon. Thanksgiving loomed like a storm cloud. Mom sent an email with a subject line, "Attendance required." Not invited, not hope to see you. Required. I printed it, folded it, and slipped it into my coat pocket like evidence. On Thanksgiving morning, the house in Green Lake smelled of sage and butter. Clara breezed in wearing gold earrings that caught every glint of light. Mom orchestrated like a general pointing, arranging, commanding. Dad set out wine glasses in silence. Dinner began with laughter that wasn't mine. Halfway through, Dad cleared his throat. Taxes are strangling us again. Lena, can you? I cut him off with a look. No. The word cracked louder than the fire popping in the hearth. Clara shifted uncomfortably. Mom's eyes narrowed into blades. Don't be ungrateful, she said softly, dangerously. Ungrateful. My fork trembled in my hand. Her smirk returned faint and cruel. You're lucky we even include you. The room froze. That sentence, the same one from Grandma's birthday, fell like a guillotine. My chest tightened, but this time I didn't bend. I set my fork down with deliberate precision. The clink echoed. Inside, something had already snapped. Silence became the language of our family after that Thanksgiving dinner. Not the peaceful kind, more like the heavy quiet of a storm you know is circling but hasn't broken yet. I avoided Green Lake for weeks. My Capitol Hill apartment felt like a bunker. I'd come home from North Beam, drop my bag, and sit in the dark with only the hum of the fridge and the buzz of my phone lighting up with unanswered messages. Mom left voicemails layered with sugar. We miss you, sweetheart. Clara's hosting a brunch at Rain City. Everyone's asking about you. I let them pile up unheard, but avoidance couldn't stop them from finding ways to remind me who held power. One Friday, I swiped my bank app at the cafe counter and my card declined. Confused, I checked the balance. Another temporary autopay had drained more than I expected. I scrolled until my throat tightened. Club fees, event deposits, taxes. All running under my name. When I called Mom, her tone was airy. Oh, don't fuss. It's just timing. I'll reimburse you. I gritted my teeth. You said that last time. Well, she replied, voice cool. If it bothers you so much, maybe you shouldn't be part of the account at all. The irony nearly made me laugh. The account was mine. Aunt June invited me to her Fremont house that weekend. Her living room smelled like cinnamon and old books. She poured tea into mismatched mugs and handed me one. You've been quiet, she said. I shrugged. That's the language Mom taught me. She studied me, eyes soft but sharp. Evelyn thrives on control. But control crumbles when you start keeping score. Are you keeping score? Lena? I didn't answer. But she must have seen it in my face, the file folder in my head, the evidence gathering dust in receipts. Then came Clara's holiday stunt. She posted on Instagram a glossy carousel of Rain City's ballroom captions dripping with gratitude. So blessed to celebrate with family, couldn't have done it without Mom's vision. In the background of one photo, blurred but clear enough, were my UX screens on a projection wall. She'd used my designs again this time in front of an audience of hundreds. I confronted her by phone. Clara, take those down, she giggled. You're being dramatic. No one even knows they're yours. They're literally mine. Metadata doesn't lie. Her voice sharpened. You sound bitter. Maybe if you were more fun to be around, Mom wouldn't. She trailed off, but the dagger was already in. I sat there, phone shaking in my hand, fury pressing against my ribs. Dylan found me at Rain and Bean the next morning, my laptop open but untouched. He slid into the booth. You look like hell, he said. Family portrait, I muttered. He leaned forward. You've been collecting ammo. When are you going to use it? I stared at the cursor blinking on the screen. Soon. The final straw came at Rain City itself. Mom insisted we attend a pre-Christmas mixer, all of us together. She framed it as unity. I knew better. At the front desk, the receptionist smiled. Welcome back, Ms. Lena Hart, primary member. Her voice rang out clear. I saw Clara's shoulders stiffen. Mom's face snapped into a mask. Actually, Mom cut in, this is the family account. My name should be. But the receptionist, polite and firm, shook her head. No, ma'am. The account is under Ms. Lena Hart. She's the primary. For a second, the chandelier light seemed to flicker. Mom's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. I caught Clara's eye. Her smile faltered. That was when I knew the balance had shifted. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The truth was already alive, humming under the marble floors. Back in my apartment that night, I opened the receipts folder. Screenshots, invoices, emails, credit statements, metadata, the group chat leak, proofs stacked like dominoes. I sat in the glow of my monitor, the city rain whispering at the window, and whispered to myself, they think I'm lucky to be included, but really, they've been living off my silence, and silence is the one thing I'm done giving. The escalation was complete. All that was left was the strike. Grandma Martha's birthday dinner was supposed to be simple roast chicken, mashed potatoes, laughter that smelled like nostalgia. Instead, it became the night every fracture in our family split wide open. The house in Green Lake glowed with candles and polished silver. Mom had arranged the table like a magazine spread, crystal glasses, folded napkins that stood like monuments, name cards at each seat. Mine was placed at the far end, close enough to be counted, but distant enough to remind me I didn't belong. Clara floated in late sequins, catching light, leaning to kiss Mom on both cheeks, as if cameras were rolling. Dad poured wine with the nervous precision of a man avoiding landmines. Dinner began with polite chatter, the clink of cutlery, the scrape of chairs. Grandma smiled at me from across the table, her eyes kind, though tired. She knew. She'd always known. Halfway through, Dad cleared his throat. His voice wavered. Taxes are still high this year. Lena, could you? I cut him off calm, but cold. No. The single syllable dropped like a stone into water. Ripples spread. Forks froze midair. Mom smirked, her wine glass tilted just so. Don't be ungrateful. We've done everything for you. Everything I asked quietly. Her lips curved sharper. You're lucky we even include you. The room locked in silence. Clara shifted her smile, breaking like porcelain. Dad stared at his plate. Grandma's breath caught soft but audible. I set my fork down. The clink echoed louder than it should have. My hands didn't shake. My voice, when it came, was low but steady. For 2 years, my card has been paying your property taxes. For 2 years, my bank account has carried Rain City dues. In that vacation you bragged about, I covered the deposit. Tonight, it ends. Mom's smirk faltered just slightly. Don't be ridiculous. Without breaking eye contact, I pulled the remote from my bag and clicked the TV in the adjoining room. The screen flickered to life, casting cold blue across the dining table. A PDF filled the screen bank statements, highlighted charges, each line item stamped with my name. This is ridiculous, Clara hissed. No, I said, my voice like glass. This is math. Numbers don't lie. The air grew heavier. Even the chandelier crystals seemed to tremble. I turned to Clara. Those slides you presented at Rain City Metadata says otherwise. They're mine. Every pixel, every timestamp. I slid a USB drive across the table. It clicked against her plate like a gavel. Her cheeks flushed crimson. You're exaggerating. Don't play innocent with me. Dylan was there when I built them. Every file, every revision. You stole them. Mom leaned forward, her voice sharpened into command. Enough. I met her gaze head on. Not enough. For years I've been erased, but not tonight. The silence thickened until it hurt to breathe. Grandma's eyes shone, her hand trembling against her glass. Dad's shoulders sagged like he'd aged 20 years in a moment. I inhaled slowly. I'm done funding this family. I've canceled every autopay. Rain City's management has been notified my name is the only one on that membership. Starting tomorrow, your access ends. Mom's mouth opened, then closed. For once, she had no script. The room didn't breathe. Even the candles seemed to burn lower, as if the oxygen had been drained out of the dining room. Mom's smirk cracked the fine porcelain mask, finally showing a hairline fracture. She set down her glass too quickly, the stem ringing against the table. You've misunderstood, she said. It was temporary. We always meant to temporary. I cut in my voice, sharp enough to slice the air. 2 years of bills withdrawn from my account. That's not temporary. That's theft dressed as family duty. Clara's face flushed, her fork trembling in her hand. Lena, you're blowing this out of proportion. We're sisters. Families share. I turned to her, calm but cold. Sharing is when both sides agree. What you did, taking my designs, presenting them as your own, that's theft too. And I have the files, the metadata, the timestamps. Want me to play them next? Her mouth opened, then closed. No sound came out. Dad finally spoke, his voice weak, the weight of years heavy in his throat. Maybe we should all just stay out of this, Howard, Mom snapped. He sank back defeated, and that was the saddest sight of all. I stood, the chair legs scraped against the polished floor, shrill like a warning siren. My shadow stretched across the tablecloth. I've carried the weight of this family long enough. Tonight, I'm putting it down. I pulled a folded letter from my bag and slid it across the table. The envelope was plain, but the words inside were sharp as blades. Boundaries, I said. Clear written, undeniable. What I will and will not do. What happens if you cross those lines? Mom didn't touch it. Her eyes burned into mine, but the fire there was sputtering. For the first time, she looked small. Grandma Martha reached across the table, her hand warm on mine. Her voice wavered, but carried. Finally, she whispered. Finally, you spoke. The silence that followed wasn't suffocating anymore. It was shattered glass lying across the floor. Dangerous, yes, but honest. I gathered my bag, my breath steady. You said I'm lucky to be included, I told them. But the truth is, you've been lucky I stayed. No one moved as I walked to the door. The chandelier above flickered once as if nodding to the shift. I opened the door, cool November air, rushing in crisp and biting. For the first time in years, the air felt mine. Behind me, I heard Clara's whisper break through the stillness. What if she never comes back? Mom didn't answer. Maybe she couldn't. I stepped into the night, the click of the door behind me sealing the old world away. The rules had changed, and they all knew it. Seattle nights have a way of wrapping you in their damp silence. Streetlights cast halos in the drizzle, and every storefront window holds a reflection you almost don't recognize. That evening, after Grandma's birthday dinner collapsed into shards, I walked home along Broadway, my heels striking against wet pavement like a drumbeat of finality. Inside my Capitol Hill apartment, the air felt different, cleaner. I dropped my bag, exhaled, and turned on the desk lamp. The yellow pool of light caught the stack of envelopes I'd prepared weeks before copies of the same letter I'd slid across Mom's table. Boundaries written in plain words. My weapon was never a raised voice. It was precision. I opened my laptop. The folder receipts glowed on the screen. Screenshots of the hardcore chat. Bank statements marked with my name. Metadata from Clara's stolen slides. The email from Rain City with the subject line primary member confirmation. I clicked through them one by one, my chest steady for the first time in years. I drafted an email to Mr. Reeves at Rain City. The subject line was simple, account update. Inside, I confirmed cancellation of all secondary members. Effective immediately. I signed it, Lena Hart, primary member. The next morning, my phone buzzed with alerts. Rain City had processed the change. Evelyn Hart and Clara Hart were no longer listed on the account, their access cards deactivated. I imagined the scene. Mom arriving in her tailored blazer, Clara trailing behind in heels, both smiling at the front desk like royalty. The receptionist scanning their cards. Red light. Declined. The pause, the confusion, the dawning humiliation. And then the explanation, access is limited to the primary member, Ms. Lena Hart. I didn't need to be there. The image alone was enough to taste like victory. That week, Clara posted an Instagram story, a carefully worded apology to her community, crediting me for the designs she'd drawn inspiration from. Her smile looked thinner than usual, as though the edges had been sanded down. The comments filled with praise for her honesty. None of them knew it wasn't honesty, it was damage control. Dad sent a text late one night. I'm sorry, I should have spoken up sooner. I stared at it for a long time, typed and deleted a dozen replies. Finally, I settled on you still can. Mom stayed silent. No calls, no messages. Just silence sharp and heavy as ever. But silence on my terms felt different. It wasn't erasure, it was space. On Sunday, Aunt June called. You shook them, she said. I didn't mean to burn it all down. No, she replied, her voice steady. You meant to survive. Sometimes survival looks like fire. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Later that night, I pinned the boundaries letter on my refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a broken wishbone, a reminder of the girl I used to be, the one who always drew the shorter half. She was gone now. I knew this wasn't the end. Families like mine don't dissolve quietly. There would be fallout, retaliation, more words like weapons, but now I wasn't defenseless. I had truth proof and the will to wield them. As I turned off the light rain tapping steady against the window, I whispered to myself, they thought I was lucky to be included. But the truth is, they've only just begun to learn what it means when I stop staying silent. The story wasn't finished. It had only just shifted into a new chapter. A few days later, I stopped by Grandma Martha's house in Ballard. Her living room smelled of apple pie cooling on the counter. She sat in her favorite chair, knitting needles clicking softly. When she saw me, her eyes welled. "You looked taller at that table," she said. I laughed quietly. I didn't feel tall. "That's how it works," she whispered. "The moment you speak truth, you grow into it." She handed me a small envelope, her handwriting looping across the front. Inside was an old photo, me at 8 years old, holding the shorter end of a snapped wishbone. Clara beside me, grinning with the longer half. On the back, Grandma had written, "One day you'll get the bigger piece." Walking home with that photo in my pocket, I realized revenge wasn't just about exposing them. It was about reclaiming the space I'd been denied since childhood. Every screenshot, every bank statement, every boundary I set was more than defense. It was building a life where their control couldn't reach. Back in my apartment, I pinned the photo next to the boundaries letter. Side by side, the wound and the cure. Proof that even the smallest fractures could grow into weapons sharp enough to cut free. I knew the war with my mother wasn't over. People like Evelyn Hart didn't surrender. They regrouped. But the next round wouldn't find me silent or unprepared. My silence had been their shelter. Now my voice would be their storm. If you've ever sat at a family table and felt invisible, if you've ever been told you should be grateful just to be included, then you know a little of what I've lived. My story isn't finished. Boundaries are just the beginning. So if you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, hit subscribe, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and stay tuned, because this story isn't over.